This is In the Black, a leadership, strategy and business podcast brought to you by CPA Australia.
Hello, I'm Aidan Ormond and welcome to In the Black. Today we'll be talking to Adam Vise about the methodology, benefits and challenges of social impact reporting. Adam is Group Treasurer and General Manager of Strategy and Impact at Australian Unity. And he's also the Chair of Birchal, Australia's leading crowdsourced equity funding platform for entrepreneurs. Today, we'll be talking to Adam about his experiences at Australian Unity, where one of his key objectives is strategic clarity and financial resourcing, and building a foundation for Australian Unity to achieve its goal of real well-being for both members and the broader Australian community. Adam has a deep understanding of impact investing and strategic decision-making, and a passion for driving positive change. And his work at Australian Unity on social impact reporting led to the development of a methodology to systematically measure the S in ESG. Welcome to In the Black, Adam.
Thank you, Aidan. Great to be here.
It's great to have you, Adam. And Australian Unity was Australia's first member-owned wellbeing company when it was established in 1840. And in 2021, you launched the company's first social impact report. Now, Adam, 181 years is a long time. How does social impact reporting link to that original mission of well-being? And I'm also wondering, did the process of reporting change what the business values?
It's a great question, and it's probably worth starting at the end. And our purpose is to positively impact the well-being of millions. Now, that's where we've got to. If we go back 180 odd years, our original goal was actually, it was a group of 7 Australians in a brand new, it was before the Federation, I guess, and they were getting together to form a mutual cooperative of people who'd put a penny in a tin week in, week out to provide a social safety net for them, not for the world at large. It wasn't like the whole, government system today. It was before that. It was very early frontier Australia. And so the goal was to look after yourself and your family if you got sick or if you died. Because in those days, if the wage earner died, typically the man, you'd actually end up in a thing called a poorhouse, which was basically an institution, almost like a jail. So that's a long time ago. But ultimately, it's not that dissimilar, if you like, to the Australian superannuation system today. It's like a savings mechanism to look after yourself as you get older and go through life. Now, over the 180 years, what we realised is it evolved as to what we did. So eventually, the social safety net came into place. We started providing doctor services because the first thing you do is, rather than just being sick or passing away, actually, what about a doctor? We started doing pharmacy. We started building retirement villages and aged care. So we followed people through their lives and we built a range of different services for that membership. And about 20 odd years ago, we thought about what are we really about? We realized, no, it wasn't me. I haven't been there for 180 years. I've only been in Australian Unity for about 6. But 20 years ago, we invested in a thing called the Australian Unity Wellbeing Index. So we got together with Deakin University, Department of Psychology, and said, well, we think we've been doing these good things for wellbeing. How do we measure it? Is this something? And so we started measuring wellbeing. And that's how we've got to this idea of our goal is to positively impact wellbeing of millions. 6 or 7 years ago, when I started, the board was saying of management, well, you say it, but how do we know you are doing it? Like, you can use rhetoric really well. Words are really easy. Numbers are a little bit harder. And so they asked the CEO, can you start to measure it? And it sort of had a few false starts on it, but a few years ago we did it and we worked out these measures. We'll talk about that in a sec. But rather than, it didn't change our purpose, but what it has done is it made it so clear. So now strategically, we will only invest the group capital where we can see an improvement in our social value measurement. because it's such a breakthrough. You realize that if you think about measuring outcomes for your stakeholders and you can show you're achieving those things, simultaneously we are for profit, and you can show that something achieves both profit and outcomes for your stakeholders in a measured way, suddenly strategic clarity becomes absolute. And so the tone of pursuing social impact, measuring well-being, and pursuing well-being for millions is an evolution of the fact we're getting even more strategic clarity. So our purpose is solidified. Our strategic decision-making has become analytical around it, and therefore the strategic tightness has been heightened. And it's been a real surprise. We didn't know it would be this good in terms of its information content, but it has been very rewarding because it was just an idea. It was an idea to be more accountable. But it turns out once you start measuring, you start getting technical and thinking about things analytically, it can become a very powerful decision tool.
And you say rewarding. It sounds like you really feel that it's been worth the changeover, I guess you could say.
Well, I'm in the middle of it, so I'm super lucky because an enterprise to invest in a system or a framework like this is not light in resources. We do it very frugally, but a company that only has one goal of maximizing profit, I don't know if they'd necessarily go this pathway as a first step. So being in a mutual where we're going, no, well, this is our purpose beyond just for profit has meant that we're in a really lucky spot. So I feel I feel quite privileged to be able to pursue it. And it's been quite a team of rotating through this role. Belinda Seal was the head of strategy when we actually landed it. So she actually has more say or more a role in the construction. Siobhan, who now leads the measurement, was there for the whole journey as well. So it really is exciting because it's a broad team, a reasonable amount of resources, and it does work and it provides clarity that makes your job more enjoyable and more purposeful. And people are motivated by purpose. Now, I'm a finance guy and originally thought people were motivated by numbers or money and value. And actually, people are motivated by value, but not just financial value. And so the moment you can enrich their lives in the same way as we've got a system of reward based on financial, you quickly see the nature of humans accelerating to achieve things in other dimensions if you start measuring them. So it is rewarding. It's rewarding in a way that is a bit surprising. The truth is the realization of purposeful corporations is a pretty big adjustment. So yeah, particularly with less and less religion, people are looking for their businesses, their services they're buying to actually achieve their broader set of purposes they want from life. So actually a company that's proactively thinking about it is, I think starting to get competitive advantage from it as well.
And Adam, can you share with us the origin story of that first report and maybe some of the partnerships and some of the challenges that you encountered leading up to its release in 2021?
Yeah, so the starting point was the board asked for evidence. They didn't say how, which is a pretty generous ask because it gave us a blank sheet of paper rather than, well, this or this. We spent the first year working, what are we going to measure? And we realized, or we came back to our wellbeing objective. So the beauty of this was we already had this wellbeing history and we'd been talking about it, but we'd never put it in the dead middle of the frame. And once we agreed that's what we're going to be seeking to aim, the wellbeing and outcomes for our members, for our customers, our employees and the community at large, we realized we really need some help. So we reached out and we found a great group called Social Ventures Australia. It's probably one of the earliest social impact organizations. It was created by Michael Trail, who's a bit of a revolutionary in social impact financing, ex-Macquarie guy as well, who built a whole range of businesses, including, Good Start, Australia's leading childcare educator, and built it for impact rather than just purely for profit. And so they had this great methodology around social value. And so we said, how do we do this? So they've lent in over the last 5 years helping us do it. Then as we started to do it, we realized we needed to get assurance that what we're doing wasn't crazy. So we had our assurance partners. Originally it was PwC, now KPMG. Once we got them to review our work, so we worked out our numbers and, to give it credibility, we have assurance. And then we tried to take it to the capital market and we spoke to all 4 banks and one bank said, on a sustainability loan basis, we accept that you could have one goal of being your CSV about social impact. Some banks were saying, oh, we want you to have environmental goal. And that's not our purpose. We are concerned about looking after the environment and our impact, but it's not our purpose. And we said, no, we want the goal of our objective. And so Westpac said, we're going to back you on that. And that was a really profound moment where they had changed how they'd always approached sustainability-linked loans and said, we will endorse you and give you capital with rewards for you to pursue your social purpose. And they also brought along a second-party opinion provider called ISS. So there's all of these people or assurance providers that are looking and watching us and saying, we'll give you capital and we want to make sure you are true to your word. And that's a very powerful tool. And, a lot of people in this audience, I suspect, as accountants and auditors, this is actually a great demonstration that the skills can be used beyond just financial value. And it actually is really critical for credibility.
Well, why don't we delve in a little deeper on that one? In your partnership with Social Ventures Australia, you developed a community and social values framework, also called the CSV framework. Adam, can you explain what this framework is and how does it work in practice?
It looks like the Australian accounting standards, but we're at year 4. So my boss, Darren Mann, who's the CFO, is a bit of a fan of the Medici accounts that he saw at Harvard. And, the realization that accounting principles and standards have been evolving for 400 or 500 years. We're at year 4. So what does it look like? It is a methodology and principles-based approach. We focus on, and there's sort of 5 levels. So like the accounting, I remember when I was studying and accounting and teaching accounting at university, it was actually, the accounting concepts, the SACs, the intellectual framework for accounting. This looks and feels a lot like it. So 1, we identify the goal, which is to focus on social outcomes, outcomes for stakeholders, which is essential. Then we look to set clear boundaries, like define classification almost. And in central of that is a theory of change or causation of, if you do this, it improves someone's life like that. Then we seek to attach value, so valuation, and that's really from a stakeholder perspective, not from ours, but what value does that stakeholder put on that outcome? Then classic accounting, conservatism, it was the old word we used to call it. Here we call it do not overclaim. We have to attribute things that would have happened without us. We don't want to count that. That's not fair. That would have happened without us, so that's not our social impact. That's just the social outcome. We only count the things that we caused, and then we also acknowledge the things that others contributed to. So we actually do attribution. And then finally, we rely on quality data, so verification, data sourcing, and the like. So if it sounds a little bit like accounting, I think it is. It's derived from a thing called social value. There's an international body of experts creating social value for things like social return on investment. This is not a social return on investment per se, but it uses that methodology for those 5 big elements of principle. It's in the middle of our impact report. We explain it, we're accountable to it. And not only do the auditors check our numbers, but they check the construct of the measurements that are consistent with all 5 principles. So it's a second level of accounting, if you like, second use case.
And you mentioned the word outcomes there. Australian Unity, they measure 226 outcomes in this framework, in the CSV framework, across wealth, health, and care. So on the surface, it sounds like you might be managing a lot of new data. How do you measure these outcomes? And do you have an example of how you can go from setting the outcome to measuring its impact?
Yeah, so the great thing about this is it starts with the stakeholder. So we sit down with each of the businesses. We have quite a few business lines or different types of products inside the business. As I said, we've got health insurance. We no longer provide doctors, but we do still do retirement villages and aged care. And we sit down and go, how do you think you're making an impact on those people's lives? So the methodology requires a reflection on the stakeholder outcomes that the businesses think they're trying to achieve, which to me is actually strategy 101. Like, what do we think we're doing? How are we improving people's lives, or what problem are we solving? So this is not an approach that's sort of a left of field start again. It's like, what do you think you're doing that's going to make people happier or make people's well-being improve? And then we try to break down and how do we think we cause that? Like, actually have a theory of change of what do we think we're doing, and then we look for drivers that would demonstrate that or evidence that, and we think about value. So there is 226 lines of insight. Not all of them attract value. Some of them would happen anyway. So there's a few zeros against some of those. Some of my favorites are, we think about the number of home care customers that would report an improved sense of independence. So one thing about doing care in the home is keeping people in the home makes them feel like they're in control. And this is a transformation for how healthcare is provided over the next 20 or 30 years for two reasons. So we've identified two values from keeping them in the home. One is they feel like they're in control of the healthcare. And, talking earlier about men, I think this is really valuable for men. Men do not like going to hospitals, but if you give them care in the home, they're suddenly in charge. We actually have a clinical service where we'll help people monitor their own heart so they don't have to stay in hospital for 3 days. So suddenly they're in charge of their own stats. And that creates a sense of independence. And we actually will strive to value how would we see that showing up. And then we try to attribute value to it. How do you attribute value to that? It's like everything in accounting, it's all relative value. So we look for stack preferences, think about what else would that customer value? And invariably, as you get older, people value social interaction, a night out or a dinner. And we try to create a series of equivalences and work out what they are worth. So we think about it from the stakeholder's perspective. And so we have turned the idea of someone feeling independence into a dollar value. And it's a bit of a leap, but the key to this is that dollar value means we can compare it to others. We know the dollar isn't exactly the same as someone being independent as, say, a person that has, like a student who suddenly has access to student accommodation, so they avoid housing stress. It's a different, would measure their housing stress consequence and how would they value having less stress around that. So the dollars mean slightly different things, but they're still comparable because there's still an underlying value sense. And so really that's the way we approach it. We get up to 220 of those outcomes that we think we make a material impact on, and we put it all into a giant number bucket. But the reason we do that is we can then say, okay, next dollar of capital, what do we think we can make a difference on? And we can think about student accommodation against the idea of, do we put more money into providing another care space or another place where we can look after people in the home? Some of the other ones are things like MindStep, where we can help people address mental health or anxiety issues online. We can think about hospital beds saved by our building of private hospitals, or even something really simple like Indigenous procurement. We know that every dollar we spend in the service economy in things that we need as a business, as we go through an Indigenous procurement model, we're actually delivering value to Indigenous procurement business. So we'd actually say there's $1 per dollar. There's probably good evidence to support that might be more valuable and we'll do more work. And this is the beauty of our methodology, is it requires us to continue to get better. Think about it, evidence it, show the data, and look for a better measurement. There's a few examples. Across health, wealth, and care, you can imagine there's 220 very different examples.
And I love what you said about independence. It's so true about feeling independent in that scenario. Let's talk about challenges, Adam. And you've spoken about some of the challenges that led to that first report back in 2021. Are there other challenges that you faced along the way? And do you have any tips or solutions for those listening to this podcast who might be facing similar challenges?
Yeah, the number one challenge is where to start. Because I'd imagine a lot of people go, we're not a social impact business. Why would I bother? So that's even harder. And for some that are, they go, hey, yeah, we really need to measure this, but really, what are we about? And the key is actually how to start. And so bigger businesses are incentivized to do this by the ESG community. We started a little bit like this, like, do you pursue, though, UN development goals? Do you pursue B Corp? Do you pursue employee well-being? Do you just focus on output in terms of carbon emissions? And that requires so much navel gazing for the corporation, because corporation, it's just an entity of stakeholders. So if the corporation's going, what matters to me, you kind of get stuck, because it's nothing to do with the corporation. It's about the stakeholders that are around it. And so you've got to start by thinking about your stakeholders and what does the entity think about, not just corporations, it can be charities, it can be a not-for-profit, it can be a local community. What are you trying to achieve? And what are you trying to achieve for the stakeholder? Invert it. And so working out what you're about, whether you want to chase UN development goals or something else, like you've got to start with your stakeholders. And that, to me, is the big message. I think for us, we spent 2 or 3 years going around in circles on it, and I'm sure many others have. And there's in big business, I think there's a lot of box ticking. Oh, I need this, I need this, I need this. Really? Show me the investor that cares. I was ANZ Staff Super for many years. We were giving boxes for people to tick, and we didn't know even our stakeholders needed those boxes ticked. So we've got a gravy train of intermediaries creating boxes to tick. Ask the stakeholder, whose money is it? Ask the employee who's providing their labor. Ask the customer or the customer's family as to what you're trying to achieve. And that's the revelation of our methodology, is we start there. And that's actually where we finish as well. And so it's not box ticking, it's actually thinking stakeholder. And so our reason I'm here is that we want others to adopt a similar methodology, a universal way of measuring impact for people. Wellbeing at the heart of it, wellbeing is just a people measure of how do you feel. And so our goal is come and copy our framework. Don't have to copy all of it. We'd encourage you to, because we think as we create new methodologies, bring capital to it and the like, you can use the methodology and show that you're being accountable to your stakeholders. And you get rid of the 3 years of navel gazing and actually get real clarity about changing your business or changing your enterprise or your purpose to achieving something in the community in terms of delivering for stakeholders. Now, this is not against not making money. I'd like to think, and our thesis is that we will find those places where you make profit, where you maximize social outcome, where you're actually having the biggest impact on your stakeholders, because they'll either pay more, they'll recommend you more, and so your growth will accelerate. So this is not a calling card of more social impact. This is a calling card of more stakeholder outcomes.
Mm. And Adam, there are some who say we live in an era of rising skepticism where a few bad actors can really make it harder for companies who are doing the right thing. And many of the listeners of this show are feeling the pressure to measure more than just financials as companies aim to be more transparent and authentic. So we've been talking about the S in ESG today, but I'm wondering, how does Australian Unity face these challenges of skepticism and increased measurement and approach ESG as a whole? And have you seen positive impacts on the bottom line on top of social impacts?
So it's really early. So evidence takes time in terms of returns. So we've started with a very simple principle at the start, and that is integrity is everything. I think the world of ESG is becoming very cognizant of the importance of that. If you just make it up, you should expect scrutiny, probably litigation, and definitely loss of customer belief and support, because my experience is customers have really fine antenna as to bullshit, if I'm allowed to use that word. So integrity, and the math of this is, I think integrity is transparency and accountability. And that's kind of how we approach it, is we try to be transparent. We've got a methodology that we've published. We're accountable for it because we're publishing the result. We've got people going through it in terms of assurance, but we invite others to go through it. We want to improve it. It is not perfect, but it is certainly a starting point. And the real testable truth is the stakeholder perspective. And we like to think that we could show or be testable as to the stakeholder outcome. So if you're finding increased independence, one of the things we are trying to do is think about our wellbeing index and go, can we measure your sense of independence and future security? Can we measure it in your wellbeing? Is it showing up? And so you've got to have a discipline in how you measure and what you measure and go, is there an evidence that supports it occurring? And I think every stakeholder or anyone in measurement should be thinking, is there a second way of proving that is showing up? Otherwise, you're not going to succeed. It's just going to, people go, well, it's bullshit, going back. You have to demonstrate a truth, and truth can only be solved by evidence. It's the old scientific method, And I think that's at the center of what we're doing. Now, the beauty of our universal approach is we're measuring a lot of things across a diverse business. It's not that diverse in the sense we predominantly provide, we've got a portfolio of businesses in health, wealth, and care services. And predominantly that's a service economy business. Like obviously aged care and retirement villages, we provide the facilities, but the truth is people want to live in communities. That's a service. So a lot of our stuff we think will give us evidence on financial performance in measuring these things around services. So if you think about E, it has a very strong attraction in energy networks. So great. Woodside, you should be measuring your carbon abatement. BP, car companies, builders, and the like. For us, where we're services, yep, we can measure our carbon footprint. We should be thinking, and we are thinking about how we improve and abate. But the truth is we can make a far more significant improvement in the social side in terms of well-being and demonstrating improving people's lives. Our hypothesis is it will show up in financial returns. We're year 4. Our decisions, we have raised and spent about $500 million this year and last year on investments that get good CSV scores and good financial return scores. We've got Westpac providing us capital. We've got our mutual members providing us capital. And we're saying we are backing this in as a potential pathway of demonstrating greater financial stability and sustainability. We think that it also enhances social outcomes. I think over the next 3 or 4 years, we will see whether we're right. Certainly, my view is measuring this around services-based economy. This is the real gem of it, is if anywhere is going to show up of delivering more value, it's going to be in services where your whole job is to make someone feel better, whether it be health or care, but wealth in terms of feeling more financial security. So our opportunity is let's prove it. And if nothing else, we'll certainly make our services more attuned to the wellbeing outcomes of the customer. So we'll get better. So we should be able to show evidence of better wellbeing. But I've got a theory, and it's not central that we have to grow our profitability, but our ability to scale our impact. Going back to the very start, our purpose is to deliver wellbeing for millions. If we can create more financial value, we'll have more resources. If we're doing that in ways that are doing the highest outcomes in terms of social value at the same time for our stakeholders, we should be able to scale our impact. And that is really why we're doing it. This is a pathway to achieve our purpose. So kind of feel all right at work because I think I'm just trying to help the organization achieve its goal. And measurement is actually really central. And we'll see how we go over the next 4 or 5 years.
Adam, thanks so much for joining us on the In the Black podcast today and sharing your insights with us. It's been fantastic.
Oh, thanks, Aidan. Delighted, really, not just you, anyone. We are keen to talk about it. This is, I don't know if the Medicis were so generous, but we think we've found something that's really valuable, certainly for accountants and people who like analytical approaches to things. I think this is a really powerful tool and just really want to encourage the world to open up to it. I think there's a real opportunity here.
And thank you for listening to In the Black. Don't forget to check the show notes for resources on the CPA Australia website and everything we've mentioned in this episode. Until next time, thanks for listening.
If you've enjoyed this episode, help others discover In the Black by leaving us a review and sharing this episode with colleagues, clients, or anyone else interested in leadership strategy and business. To find out more about our other podcasts, check out the show notes for this episode. And we hope you can join us again next time for another episode of In the Black.